Anglo-Saxons by Curtis Chung, Zach Hamilton, Julian Montague, and Alyssa Rauschenberger. English is a diverse and special language, borrowing words and structures from cultures all around the world. Some cultures that greatly affected English, arguably starting the foundation for it, were the West Germanic languages spoken by the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes. The Anglo-Saxons and Jutes were tribes that came from northern Germany and Denmark. The Saxons arrived in Britain in 4th Common Era. By the 6th century, the Germanic tribes had won land from the native Britons and had traded kingdoms. The characteristics that distinguished the tribes from each other slowly faded until they all referred to themselves as either Anglo-Saxon or English. After the arrived in 450 Common Era, the Roman mercenaries who were protecting the Celts left and started conquering land in the southeast. This pushed the Celts up to the northwest. After the foederati pushed them to the northwest, many Celtic aristocrats migrated to Brittany. This was known as the Second Migration. There were 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, each ruled by one king. The noble family was referred to as the ealdormen. Land was divided into units called hides. 100 hides made up a unit called a hundred, and each village was made up of many hundreds. There were 3 general social classes: the aristocracy, the middle class, and the lower class. If someone in the middle class owned 5 hides of land, and they had the rights of the lowest rank in aristocracy, the thane. The lower class was made up of slaves.
So, one common question might be, where does Old English fit into the European language tree? As this diagram shows, Old English is a Germanic language, and can be traced through the Germanic family tree. However, both Old English and Modern English have been heavily influenced by external languages due to all of the times Britain was invaded over the years. The first invaders, who were the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, created a new language they called English. Another group of invaders that impacted the Old English language was the Norman French, whose invasion led to a lot of Anglo-Saxon words being replaced with French words. For example, the word stow was used to replace the word place. In other cases, French and Anglo-Saxon words were both used in the language, but the meanings began to change. An example of this is the word house, which is Anglo-Saxon, and the word mansion, which is French. Even though the idea was very similar, the meanings began to represent different objects as the language developed. The English language has been influenced not only by French, but also by Latin. Latin was the language of scholars during the time that English was developing. Therefore, a bunch of Latin words became incorporated into English as more English speakers learned Latin. In total, there are thousands of French and Latin words in English language. This chart shows a few of the words that show the relation between Latin, French, and English.
Many words we use today are carried down from Old English. Interestingly, many of our common swear words are also of Anglo-Saxon origin. However, there are some words from Old English that no longer exist in Modern English. Old English was much more complicated than Modern English. For example, adjectives, nouns, pronouns, and verbs were fully inflected, whereas in Modern English, only verbs are inflected. In Old English, nouns had 3 genders, were inflected for 4 cases, in both the singular and the plural. Verbs had only 2 tenses, 3 moods, and 2 numbers, as well as 3 persons. There were 2 classes of verb stems. A verb stem is the part of a verb to which inflectional changes indicating tense, mood, number, etc. are added. These classes of verb stems were referred to as strong verbs and weak verbs. A strong verb, when conjugated, changed its root, whereas weak verbs changed endings. For example, sing is considered a strong verb because the past tense form of sing is sang, not singed. However, in some ways, Modern English has elements that did not exist in Old English. For example, in Old English there were 2 demonstratives meaning that and this, but no articles, the definite article being expressed by the use of the demonstrative for that, or not expressed at all. In Modern English, however, we have more articles, such as a and an, as well as the definite article the. Also, because of multiple inflections per sentence, and later the use of prepositions, word order was much freer in Old English. Although Old English appears quite different from Modern English in written form, once read aloud, Old English words become quite familiar. Many of the most basic and commonly used words in English today have their roots in Old English, including words like water, earth, house, food, etc. During the 6th century, for reasons which are still unclear, the Anglo-Saxon consonant cluster SK changed to SH. Then around the 7th century, a vowel shift took place in Old English pronunciation, similar to the great vowel shift during the early modern period, in which vowels began to be pronounced more toward the front of the mouth. As part of this process, the plurals of several nouns also started to be represented by changed vowel pronunciations rather than changes in inflection. These changes were sometimes, but not always, reflected in revising spellings, resulting in inconsistent modern word pairings, such as foot and feet, man and men, as well as blood, bleed, and broad and breadth, etc. Even with the similarities between Old English and Modern English, there are some words we use today that may have had different meanings. Words such as wife, which originally meant any woman, married or not, fowl, which meant any bird, not just a farmyard one, and soon, which meant immediately, not just in a while, mean different words now than they would have then.
Old English is very different from Modern English, from different endings to having different cases and word structure. One important difference from Modern English and Old English is that Old English had inflectional endings. Over time, as the language developed, the variety of these endings slowly got smaller, going from 3 different vowels to 1 vowel and then not having any inflectional endings. Another difference is that in Old English, there were 4 cases, which were common in many Indo-European languages. Eventually, these distinctive cases faded from the language, and the verb structure became more complex, creating different tenses such as the past perfect, future pluperfect. One final difference, and perhaps the most important change from Old English to Modern English, is that the sentence structure changed. As the number of nouns and verb endings were reduced, the order of elements within the sentences became more fixed, which eventually led to words sounding awkward to place an object before the verb. This awkwardness in speech led to the word order changing from subject-object-verb to subject-verb-object.
The language spoken by the Anglo-Saxons at the time of their migration to Britain was probably relatively uniform. Over time, however, Old English developed into 4 major dialects. The Angles spoke Northumbrian in the north of the River Humber, and also Mercian, spoken in the Midlands. The Jutes spoke Kent and Kent in the far southeastern part of the island, and the Saxons spoke West Saxon, spoken in the southwest. All of these dialects have direct descendants in modern England, and American regional dialects also have their roots in the dialects of Old English. Standard Modern English, if there is such a thing, or at least Modern English spelling, owes most to the Mercian dialect, since that was the dialect of London. Most Old English literature, however, is not in the Mercian dialect, but in West Saxon. Nearly all of Old English poetry is in West Saxon, though it often contains spelling vocabulary more typical of Mercian and Northumbrian. Beowulf was probably originally written in Northumbrian. The single manuscript that has come down to us, though, which dates from around 1000, contains a bewildering mix of Northumbrian, West Saxon, and Anglian dialects, which leads some scholars to believe that much of the poetry was first composed in Mercian or Northumbrian and later translated to West Saxon. The conquest Wessex dominated the rest of Anglo-Saxon England politically and culturally. West Saxon was the dominant language during the period in which most of our surviving literature was recorded. By the 9th century, the West Saxon dialect had widespread use in literature, which aided in the dialect becoming the dominant dialect among scholars. By the 10th century, the West Saxon dialect had become the dominant and effectively the official language of Britain. The West Saxon dialect of Wessex became the standard English of the day, although the other dialects continued nonetheless. And for this reason, the great bulk of surviving documents from the Anglo-Saxon period were written in the dialect of Wessex.
In conclusion, the Anglo-Saxon society made a prominent and lasting impact on the English language. As an infrastructure of our everyday speech, it has certainly helped shape the English language into the language it is today.